The rooftop lights shimmered like distant stars the moment I watched my father tip a pinch of white powder into my champagne flute. His hand didn't tremble. His smile didn't shift. Nobody saw it happen. Not the orchestra, not the guests, not even my sister reaching for her drink beside me. I held the glass, feeling the stem warm against my palm, pretending I hadn't just watched my world split in two. They expected me to swallow it like every other unspoken command in our family. Instead, I raised the glass, met his eyes, and made a decision. Later, people would ask when everything truly started. I think it was the night I refused the drink that was meant for me. I grew up in a household where silence had more gravity than affection. The walls were practically curated for Ava. Rows of framed certificates, shining trophies, glossy photos with judges, coaches, donors. My own pictures were there too, lower down, slightly crooked, like even the drywall understood the pecking order. When I was 12, I won the state science fair with a project I assembled in the kitchen while everyone slept. Water samples, chemical runoff charts, a poster board held together with determination. I walked into breakfast holding the winning ribbon like it mattered. Victor didn't glance up from his tablet. Helena kept reading the newspaper. Ava was already dressed perfectly for her debate tournament, hairpin just how our mother preferred. That's expected, Victor muttered, flipping a page. A heiress should excel. Expected, not celebrated. Helena eventually glanced at the ribbon, but not at me. Your hair looks messy in the photo, she said, smoothing the tablecloth. Next time, stand straighter. Cameras are unforgiving. That evening, Ava's debate trophy took center stage on the shelf. My ribbon was clipped behind a framed picture of her in her tennis uniform. Half hidden, forgotten, collecting dust. The pattern never wavered. Holidays revolved around Ava's triumphs. GPA announcements, internships, her acceptance to a top-tier business school. Conversations flowed toward her like water seeking its natural path. My accomplishments were treated like errands, useful but not remarkable. When I declared I wanted to study environmental science, the entire house shifted like someone had cracked a window during winter. Victor called it pointless. Helena said no serious person would choose a field with no respectable future. Ava lingered in the doorway while they lectured me, her expression soft but her silence loud. I learned early that sympathy without action is just another form of neglect. The summer before college, I interned for an environmental nonprofit instead of joining the family business. When Victor read my email declining their offer, he set his spoon down with the kind of careful control that meant anger. If you insist on embarrassing this family, he said, you'll deal with the consequences yourself. I went upstairs, filled out a student loan application, and felt the air in my room settle around me. Still and strangely supportive, as if it recognized a truth I'd been avoiding. The night before I moved out, Helena folded my clothes with the precision she usually reserved for Ava's business trips. No goodbye, no encouragement. Just a small pinch at a loose thread on my sleeve and a look of quiet disappointment. It wasn't cruelty. It was a blade honed so thin that you couldn't see the cut until afterward. Looking back, I see it clearly. The empty seats at my events, the conversations that veered around me, the constant reminder that I was an accessory in a house designed to highlight someone else. That was the day I understood my place. The hallway behind the rooftop kitchen was narrow and dim, lit by a single flickering bulb. I only went back there because the main restroom line stretched past the bar. The air carried the smell of citrus cleaner and overheated pipes. I was halfway to the service door when I heard my parents' voices, low, sharp, purposeful. She can't access that trust, Helena whispered. Not when everything is already unstable. It activates next week, Victor said. If she's independent, she can talk. About the waste, the reports, the samples. You know what that means. Silence. Then his voice dropped to something colder. If she's hospitalized, even briefly, the transfer freezes. And if something worse happens before the paperwork clears. Helena sucked in a breath. Victor. It's precision, he replied. A controlled setback. Nothing fatal unless her body reacts poorly. We just need time. My fingers tightened around the restroom handle. A slow, hot pressure spread in my chest, like my body was warning me to stay calm. They weren't discussing a punishment. They were planning a contingency. For me. I stepped back before they turned the corner. The hallway felt colder on the way out, as if the building itself no longer wanted me there. Back on the rooftop, the party blurred, laughter, music, glasses clinking. Helena's smile was immaculate again, eyes scanning the crowd for flaws. Victor stood near the champagne table, speaking to the head waiter with a tone that could pass for pride. When the tray arrived, I watched him select a single glass. The subtle tilt of his wrist, the faint, cloudy swirl sinking to the bottom like a secret he expected to remain buried. He placed it on the family tray as casually as if he were observing a tradition. Ava appeared beside me, brushing hair from her face, laughing at some cousin's joke. She didn't notice Victor watching me, didn't notice how tightly he watched the waiter hand us the tray. I reached for the glass meant for me. My hand paused. My heartbeat didn't. I smiled, one of those polished, camera-ready smiles. "Here," I said lightly, offering it to Ava. "Take mine. It's the better pour." She accepted without hesitation. She always did. She tapped it against my untouched flute and drank. I felt nothing. Not panic, not victory. Just a heavy, final certainty settling inside me. A certainty that whatever came next was already in motion. When Ava's legs gave out, the party didn't quiet all at once. It rippled. A gasp by the orchestra, a clatter of utensils, the roll of her glass spinning across stone. By the time I reached her, her skin had turned pale under the rooftop lights, her breathing shallow and irregular. Victor shoved through the circle forming around her, calling her name with a desperation he had never once used for mine. Helena's fingers trembled as she tried to smooth Ava's hair, her breath catching in her throat. I knelt beside them, steady only because falling apart wasn't an option. "We need an ambulance," I said. No one argued, not this time. The service elevator groaned as it carried us down. Ava's head slumped against my shoulder, her pulse fluttering wildly beneath my fingertips. I forced myself not to think about the poison. Not here. Not yet. The elevator numbers flicked upward, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly. I kept my breathing controlled, replaying the moment in fragments. Her glass, mine, the swap, the powder dissolving into gold. Decisions made in the span of a heartbeat follow you, no matter where you run. The paramedics were waiting in the ambulance bay. They lifted Ava from me, whisking her under harsh hospital lighting that made everything look too vivid. Helena hurried after them, firing questions no one could yet answer. Victor hung back, knuckles white around the railing. "You switched the glasses," he said, eyes fixed on the ground. I said nothing. Silence was the safest thing I owned. Inside the ER, the chaotic rhythm of machines filled the air. Nurses moved with practiced precision. Dr. Shaw arrived, composed, analytical, and began assessing Ava with quick, expert motions. "She just collapsed?" he asked. "Yes." "Medical history? Anything unusual?" Her symptoms spiraled too quickly, confusion, tremors, a heart rate climbing out of control. Something in his expression sharpened. "This resembles exposure to an anticholinergic agent," he muttered. My stomach tightened. "Check for altered derivatives," I told him quietly. "Not commercial. Research grade." Dr. Shaw's hand paused mid-note. "Why would you think?" "Just check." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded and barked orders down the hall. Detective Hall arrived 20 minutes later, his notebook already open. His initial questions were soft, routine. But when he asked what might have caused Ava's collapse, I motioned to Nina and Jenna, both pale, both shaken. Nina held out her phone. The video played silently. Victor choosing the glass, setting it slightly apart, letting the powder slip in, and me sliding the glasses in one smooth, practiced motion before lifting the safe one to my lips. Ava drank the other. The detective watched it twice, jaw tightening. "I'll need copies of everything." "They're already sent," Jenna said. I hadn't asked them to do any of it. They simply understood. When they stepped aside with the detective, I sank into a plastic chair. The vinyl chilled my palms. The room smelled of disinfectant. The vending machine hummed softly, ordinary sounds that steadied me more than any reassurance could. Across from me, Helena stared toward Ava's room while Victor stared at the floor. "You're mistaken," Helena whispered eventually, her voice paper-thin. I didn't reply. "We would never hurt family," she insisted, louder now, as if volume could rewrite truth. Still I stayed quiet. Dr. Carter approached next, worry pulling at his features. Hours earlier at the party, he'd congratulated me with a gentleness I wasn't used to. Now he looked as though he was assembling a picture he wished he hadn't recognized. "I heard," he said softly. "If there's anything I can do." "There is," I answered. "But the right people already have what they need." He understood without pressing further. Time blurred. More tests, more samples, more questions. Then Agent Brooks from the Federal Environmental Division arrived with a calm authority that seemed to shift the atmosphere. He reviewed the footage, asked about lab access, internal files, security logs. I answered plainly. Facts were enough. By the time the first light of morning touched the windows, Ava had stabilized. She was groggy, disoriented, but alive. I stood beside her when her eyes fluttered open. "It wasn't meant for you," I whispered. Her brow creased faintly. She was still pushing through the tail end of the toxin, so I didn't explain further. Clarity could wait. Back in the waiting room, the city was waking. Engines rumbled in the distance. Nurses swapped shifts. I opened my laptop and finally did what I'd been avoiding for years. I created a timeline, logged every suspicious shipment, indexed the hidden updates Margaret had warned me about, uploaded copies of the water tests from her lake house, sorted photos from the West Drainage site, organized emails, threats disguised as professional guidance, orders masked as suggestions, folders upon folders labeled with everything they hoped no one would uncover. Truth arranged neatly. I drafted a message to Claire, the attorney I'd quietly contacted when the house had gone silent weeks before graduation. "We move forward now." I sent it without hesitation. Then I closed out everything tied to my family's legacy, scheduled a formal meeting with federal investigators, backed up my files to an encrypted drive, deleted every old access link. By sunrise, the waiting room had emptied except for a janitor wiping down the floor. When I finally stood stretching my stiff shoulders, I felt something unfamiliar, lighter, unburdened, unbound. My parents sat down the hall with their lawyer, voices low and urgent. From where I stood, they looked small, contained, manageable. For the first time, they weren't the gravitational center of my life. I stepped outside. The morning air kissed my face, cool and honest. "This time," I whispered into the quiet, "I'm not repairing what they destroyed." By midday, the hospital had shifted into a controlled investigation. Uniformed officers guarded the hallway outside Ava's room. The truth had finally settled, and it wasn't going anywhere. A pair of detectives murmured to each other near the nurse's station, and beside them, Agent Brooks studied the printed toxicology report with a razor-sharp focus. Dr. Shaw reached me first. His face was calm, but the tension showed in the way he pinned his thumb against the corner of the chart. "The results are in," he said. "Your sister was exposed to a modified anticholinergic compound. Research grade. Not something you can buy." The hallway didn't spin or sway. It simply shrank around me until the only sound left was the faint buzzing of the lights above. "We've seen early prototypes of similar agents," Agent Brooks added, stepping forward. "From labs connected to your family's corporation." Victor and Helena, seated a few chairs away, went rigid. Detective Hall tapped a pen lightly against his tablet. "We'll need statements from all of you." They took Victor first. He straightened, slipping into the authority he had relied on his whole life. "This is ridiculous," he started. "Ava must have reacted to the catering or the champagne. There's no history in our." Detective Hall flipped the tablet toward him. The silent footage played. Victor selecting the glass, the white powder dispersing, the stem in his hand, my polite smile as the flutes changed places, Ava raising the drink. The evidence was simple, cold, perfect. Victor's face drained. His mouth moved but no sound came out, like a man who'd forgotten how words work. "She drank what was meant for me," I said. Not an accusation, just a truth placed gently into the room. Helena stood abruptly, as if some invisible thread tugged her upward. "You don't understand," she whispered. "We were trying to protect the family. Everything was collapsing. The investigation, the reports. If they were released. So slowing me down was the solution?" I asked. Her silence was its own admission. Agent Brooks shuffled through a folder of lab access logs. "Mr. Harris checked out the compound 3 days before the party. We've also located a storage unit tied to forged signatures, documents, test samples, disposal records, all pointing to attempts to shift the liability. Victor shot Helena a look sharp enough to cut skin. "You should have kept your mouth shut." She recoiled. Detective Hall closed his notebook. "Both of you will be taken into custody pending formal charges." 2 officers stepped forward. The cuffs clicked into place like punctuation. Ava, pale and unsteady, stood in her doorway watching. She didn't speak or move, just stared at the people who raised us as if they were strangers wearing familiar faces. Victor turned toward me. "You did this." "No," I replied softly. "You did." Helena reached toward Ava, hand trembling. "Sweetheart, please." Ava stepped back. No words were necessary. The distance was her verdict. As our parents were led away, the hallway seemed to widen, as though the air itself finally loosened. Not triumph. Not relief. Just space, clean and honest, where their shadows had been. Agent Brooks handed me a card. "We'll need your cooperation going forward." "You'll have it." He nodded. "Justice begins with clarity. You've provided that." When everyone dispersed, I sank into a chair outside Ava's room. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, laying slender bars of gold across the floor, like the world had quietly rearranged itself while we weren't watching. Ava eased into the seat beside me, her fingers sliding into mine with a steadiness her body hadn't fully regained. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," I said. "But the beginning is here." The lake house was quieter than memory, quieter than any place had a right to be. Mornings unfolded in layers, mist first, then pale blue light, then the slow appearance of the shoreline, as though the world preferred to wake gently. I'd sit on the wooden steps with a warm mug clasped between my hands, letting the cold air settle around me. After months of sirens, hearings, and hospital corridors, the quiet felt unreal. Ava moved through the house cautiously those first weeks, regaining strength stolen by the compound. Sometimes I'd hear her pacing upstairs, the groan of the floorboards keeping time with her breaths. Other times she'd join me outside, wrapped in one of my oversized sweaters, gazing at the water without a word. She'd traded her tailored business clothes for soft cotton. Her once polished hair now fell in loose, unbothered waves. She looked like someone stepping out of a life that never truly fit. Meanwhile, my days found a new rhythm. I worked remotely with a small environmental restoration group, drafting assessments, analyzing chemical traces, creating cleanup strategies, projects uncannily similar to the facility my family used to run. There was something quiet and satisfying about using the knowledge they tried to bury to repair instead of hide. Occasionally, federal updates arrived. Seized assets, progress on soil decontamination, testimony from employees now brave enough to speak. I read each notice slowly without celebration. Closure, I learned, wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, steady. A series of clean pages replacing corrupted ones. One evening, I followed the narrow path behind the house. Leaves cracked underfoot. The lake caught the last smear of red sunlight. I stood at the dock, breathing in cold water and pine. My reflection looked calmer, older, but lighter too. The rooftop party felt distant now. A lesson studied rather than a moment survived. The glass. The powder. The choice. I could remember every detail, but the urgency was gone. In its place was something quieter. Not forgiveness. Not triumph. Just release. Inside, Ava sat at the kitchen table sorting through her law school materials. She looked up and offered the first truly unguarded smile I'd seen in months. "There's still a lot ahead," she said. "I know," I answered. "But the weight feels different." "It does." A breeze slipped through the window, lifting the corner of her notebook. She laid her hand over it, steady and sure. We sat in companionable silence, the kind that neither demands nor conceals. The kind that finally belonged to us. I used to think survival meant shrinking, staying quiet, smoothing myself into whatever shape kept the peace. But standing at the dock, with the lake breathing softly against the shore, I understood something simpler. Distance isn't abandonment. It's healing. Truth doesn't require witnesses. It just needs room to stand. My family taught me how silence wounds. Life taught me how silence restores. Between those edges, I built a boundary that finally holds. The road ahead isn't loud or victorious. It's mine. And that at last is enough.